What's up guys, Litzie here with Tactical Hyve. We're starting a new video series on rifle fundamentals. I'm gonna take you guys through some of the basics, the most basic thing like stance, grip, shoulder placement. We're gonna work our way through each fundamental and we're not gonna go into too much detail right away, but we're gonna do enough to get people shooting their rifles at a pretty solid level. All right, so before we dive into the fundamentals, I'm just gonna go over what I'm using today. So I have a pistol caliber carbine here, 9mm, and I have a standard 223 AR-15. These fundamentals apply no matter what rifle you're shooting. It doesn't matter if you're shooting a 22 long rifle, it doesn't matter if you're shooting a 308 AR-10 or even something like a bolt action hunting rifle. The fundamentals still matter with every platform. Obviously, we're working on offhand skills right now, and whenever I say offhand, I mean unsupported shooting positions where I'm just standing and shooting. So recoil does come into play, but you should still have the proper fundamentals that I'm going to go through no matter what gun or how much recoil the gun has. For our rifle fundamentals, we're going to literally start from the ground up. First thing being our feet and how we're going to place our feet. Two things that I see people do when they're shooting rifles is A, people shooting completely bladed, aiming like this at a target, and people trying to force themselves to be completely square and shooting like this at a target. What we're gonna do is find the most neutral position that doesn't require us to create tension to index on a target. So usually what that is for a right-handed shooter is they're gonna have their left foot slightly in front. For a left-handed shooter, you're gonna have your right foot slightly in front, and your feet are gonna be about shoulders width. We'll go over certain situations where this can change, but for right now, just try to find something that feels natural to you. You don't really need to force anything in this. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is index on this right cardboard target. I'm a right-handed shooter, so for me, that's gonna mean my left foot, like I said, is a little bit in front. My right foot's bladed back a little bit. I'm not completely sideways, I'm not completely square. For me, this just feels natural. I think for everybody, it's gonna look a little different depending on your body type. There's no perfect way to set up your feet. There's just wrong ways. Most of the time, the way that induces the least amount of tension in your body is gonna be the correct way. So this is what it's gonna look like, me aiming at the target. I should also mention that I'm not putting more weight on my front foot, more weight on my back foot. I am just centered over both feet in the most neutral stance that I can possibly be in. So what I can't stress enough is do not create unnecessary tension and don't force things that feel unnatural, because you just don't need to. And anybody that tells you that you need to are working around an issue that doesn't exist. So just to go in a little more detail about how bladed I am with my stance, this is something where you just need to kind of point at a target and see what feels right for you. For me, if I'm pointing at the target and I stand like this, I feel tension throughout my core that's pulling my body now to the left. I don't want that. If I stand completely square to the target like this, I now feel tension in my back that's twisting my body to the right. If I point at the target and I stand just like this, I feel absolutely no tension. It feels like I'm just standing, hanging out, talking to somebody, and that's really what you're looking for. Okay, so we just covered the basics of our stance and how we're gonna set our feet up. The next aspect that I'm gonna talk about is how we're gonna place the stock in our shoulder. And this is really one of the most important aspects of being an effective rifle shooter. So number one thing that I'm looking for is placement left to right, which is gonna be in between my pectoral muscle and my shoulder muscles, my deltoids. I see a lot of people placing stocks completely on their pectoral, on their chest, which is going to make the gun bouncy and hard to control under recoil. I also see a lot of new shooters. You see a lot of hunters, people that just got their first rifle, bolt action shooters, putting their stock really far out on their shoulder because, you know, they think, oh, I shoot a rifle on my shoulder, so I'm going to put it on my shoulder. That is also incorrect. We want to be right in between those two, and essentially we want the rifle to be as deep into our shoulder pocket, we're going to call it the shoulder pocket, as we can be. And directly related to that is our grip on the gun. We're going to do as little as we can with our firing hand, meaning we're not going to be pulling the gun into our shoulder with our firing hand. We're not going to be creating a lot of tension. We're going to be doing all the work with our support hand. For a right-handed shooter, that's going to be your left hand. For a left-handed shooter, that's going to be your right hand. So I'm gonna find that pocket of my shoulder. I'm gonna loosely grip the gun just enough to control it with my strong hand. And now is when I am going to induce tension on the gun, and this is some of the only tension I am gonna induce, which is with my left hand. So now that I found this pocket in my shoulder, I'm pulling the gun into that pocket of my shoulder to take up any slack, we're gonna call it, which means basically I'm compressing the muscles and fat tissue in my shoulder so that the gun doesn't have anywhere to move under recoil. Okay, so now we've found the correct placement of the stock in our shoulder pocket. We're loosely gripping the gun with our firing hand, and we're controlling the gun with our support hand. I should also mention that when we're grabbing the gun with the support hand, we don't need to be locked out as far as we can possibly be. We don't need to be twisted over the top of the gun. We also don't need to be back on the handguard as far as we can. We just want to take that original stance, that footwork that we set up, take your arm, bring your hand up to the gun, and that's it. Whatever the most neutral position that your hand can come up to that handguard without inducing tension is gonna be the best placement of your support hand on a rifle. Okay, so now that we found our shoulder placement and our proper grip with our strong and support hand, I'm gonna talk about tension. First thing that I see people do wrong all the time is they are creating tension in their pectorals and their shoulders. They're tensing up and squeezing the gun. We want absolutely no tension in our chest and our shoulders. We want this entire area where that stock is to be completely loose, and we want to be, the only tension that we're creating is with our support hand pulling it into that. If you can watch the gun right now, when I flex my pectoral muscles, you can see the gun gets pushed away from me, and I'm essentially going from super stable platform for that gun to transfer energy straight into my body to creating like a round shape, which is like my pectoral muscle that gun is now bouncing and going to be oscillating on under recoil. So this tension can be kind of hard to isolate because I'm telling you to do two things at the same time. I'm telling you to have no tension on one side of your body and at the same time be pulling the gun in with your left hand. And this is something that you just have to put the time in and work and get a feel for, and you need to be conscious of. So like the sensation that I should be feeling is maybe playing with actually tensing up, and you will immediately feel that gun move. And that can be done by, if I'm pulling my arm downward, that's gonna cause tension. If I'm chicken winging, you're gonna feel a different type of tension. That's more in my shoulders and my back that it's creating. And if I'm twisting where I'm too, like we talked about, if I'm twisting where I'm too square to a target, or if I'm twisting where I'm too bladed, you're gonna feel different types. So just play around with that. That's something that is gonna feel a little different for every person. But if you can be cognizant of the fact that you need to be completely loose in the shoulder pocket region, and you need to be pulling the gun with your left hand, I think it's something that anybody with, putting in a little bit of time and work can really find what works for them. So I just want to give you a quick demo of what it looks like when I'm shooting with minimal tension in my shoulder and what it looks like when I actually tense up my pectorals. And what I want you to pay attention to is the muzzle of the gun and watch how this muzzle moves. I'll shoot how I normally would. I'm gonna be loose in the shoulder, pulling the gun in tight. So super controllable. The dot is having very minimal movement and it's coming right back to the exact same spot. So now going to tense up. I'm gonna basically square up a little more than I normally would, and I'm gonna tense up my shoulder. So as you can see, muzzle's lifting a lot more. What you probably can't see in the video is the left to right movement. Like that dot is moving off to the right of the target for me, and the dot is moving in a much less predictable manner. Mostly because it's bouncing against my body as opposed to just being, I'd say it's bouncing against one muscle group as opposed to just transferring the energy straight into my body. So the next aspect I want to talk about is my cheek weld on the gun. And this is actually another complete point of contact with a rifle that you don't get with a pistol that really isn't talked about enough. And it makes a huge difference in your control over the rifle. So things to note about making a proper cheek weld is I want to have my face square, and I don't want to be rolling my head over to the right. I don't want to be looking through the top of my eyes, so I don't want my head to be down. So I don't want to be like this. I don't want to be twisted to the side. I want my head to be upright and square to the target as it possibly can be, just like that. And I want to make as much contact as I possibly can with that stock. So to do that properly, you will need to adjust your stock or use an adjustable stock. You can add foam, but we can go into detail about that kind of stuff in a different video because that's a whole nother rabbit hole. To create that tension or that grip with the cheek, with your cheek weld, you want to start high on the gun and drop your cheek in while keeping your head square like we talked about. So for me, that's what that looks like. You can see the tension in my cheek. You can see the fat of my cheek being pressed into that stock, and I can't go any lower. I'm seeing straight through the center of the dot right now. The dot is centered in the window, and I really can't go lower even if I press. And that's what I'm looking for. I actually do want tension with my cheek against that cheek riser, just like I want that tension with my front hand pulling the gun in. I'll show you guys now what that looks like when I start live firing, just like I did with the shoulder tension. So let's load up. What I want you to pay attention to this time is the movement of this stock on my shoulder. So I'm gonna lock in, I'm gonna have a really good cheek weld this time. And now I'm gonna shoot with a crappy chin weld, just letting the gun kind of move. So you can probably see, even in the video, that stock is able to move up and down a little bit on my shoulder under recoil. Whereas when I'm digging my cheek in, I'm locking it into my shoulder and I'm using an entire additional point of contact, which is almost as important as your grip with your strong hand and your grip with your weak hand. Okay, so we're talking about rifle fundamentals, but I do want to go into just a little bit more depth with this one aspect, and that's just overall tension in your body. This is something I've already talked about a little bit with our stance, with the way that we pull the gun into us. So I want to go into a little bit more detail about one thing, which is overall body tension when shooting a rifle. I know I've already talked about some specifics of where we want tension when we're shooting and where we don't want tension when we're shooting, but I also want to distinguish two shooting styles and the tension that's required for those. Given we're talking about offhand shooting here, unsupported offhand shooting. So there's two basic fundamentals of that, which is hard targets and easy targets. For easy targets, close targets, like we would see in a USPSA match or people that are doing CQB courses or something like that, we are not nearly as worried about creating tension because we're not worried about the wobble in the actual gun. We're not worried about the dots movement and controlling that. And we want to be in a more athletic stance generally. Like if I'm shooting a USPSA match, I want to be low, athletic. I want to be ready to move left and right, forward, backwards. And then you have hard targets. To aim at a hard target, if you've ever, gone out and shot a 22 at a can, it's going to be pretty hard to do when you're squatted down in an athletic stance. And something to think about is when you see the difference between an Olympic shooter, when you see like the Olympic shooters shooting 22s or air rifles, they're in the most absolute neutral stance you could ever imagine. There's literally no tension in their body. They're standing completely straight up. Their joints are locked. And that's what's required to reduce that wobble to the maximum amount. The complete opposite of that is like looking at an athlete like in football, seeing like a lineman getting prepared on the line, ready to explode and make explosive movements. What we're looking for in our stance is obviously going to be somewhere in between. It's always going to be somewhere in between those two. So for me, what that's going to look like, the more athletic style, I'm going to have my knees a little bit more bent. I'm going to be a little bit lower, but all the fundamentals are still there. My body's still facing the same way. I'm doing everything the same with how I'm pulling the gun into my shoulder. That's for, like I said, for an easy target where I want to be athletic. And if I want to hit a little bit harder target, I'm going to be a little more upright. My knees are not going to be quite as bent. I'm going to have a little less tension overall. I might not be pulling quite as hard into my shoulder, and that is going to greatly reduce the wobble that I see in the red dot. So I can show you on a couple targets here. For this target, this steel target that's right in front of me, I can easily shoot I can easily shoot that in an aggressive stance all day. But if I want to shoot 150 yards and I'm trying to be in the squatted stance, my dot is moving all over the place. But if I loosen up, I can easily make those shots. All right, so I hope you guys liked the video today. Let us know what you think in the comments. If there's anything that you saw that I'm doing that's completely different to how you've been doing it, that'd be really interesting to hear. And don't forget to like and subscribe.